Far out in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy lies a small, unregarded yellow sun. Orbiting this, at a distance of roughly 89 million miles, is an utterly insignificant little blue-green planet whose ape-descended life forms are so amazingly primitive that they still think Bluetooth headphones are a pretty neat idea. This planet has, or rather had, a problem, which is this. Most of the people living on it had never experienced the greatest sci-fi franchise of all time. Many solutions were suggested for this problem, but most of them were largely took the form of various low-budget adaptations, which were only marginally effective because they were so aggressively British that they had trouble finding audiences internationally. And so the problem remained. Lots of the people searched in vain for meaning, and most of them were prone to panic, even the ones with Bluetooth headphones. And then, one Monday, about a half century after the galaxy was introduced to the series, two podcasters recording on either side of New Jersey suddenly realized what had been going wrong the whole time, and how the story could be made accessible to all. It was right, it would work, and everyone on both sides of the pond would appreciate it. Sadly, however, before they could realize this and release it to the world, they did a quick Google search to find that a terrible, stupid, Americanized film adaptation had already been made. This is not their story, but it is the story of that terrible, stupid Americanized film adaptation. Story of a book called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. All right. I don't know if you noticed, but I started that very British, and then it kind of just like as it went on, it just kind of like fell away. That was on purpose. No, it wasn't. It is Hack Job Studios for the week, and we are talking today about a movie that is the adaptation of probably my favorite book ever, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And this movie, it's not great. But I'm not going to attack it completely. I think there are some things that are important about it. The most important thing about it I will get into later. But yeah, this is a movie that is based off of. So it's kind of a complicated story. So I'll kind of go through it as best as possible. A lot of people think that it's based off of the book, and it is technically, but the book was not the first version of this story. Douglas Adams actually wrote it originally as a radio drama that was recorded in 78, I think. And then he adapted that into the books. And then he later adapted it further into a television show, which ran on the BBC. He adapted it himself again to a text-based adventure game. And then finally, he allegedly wrote the first draft of the script that became the movie that we're going to talk about today. I probably shouldn't say allegedly because he did, and we know that he wrote a script. But the problem is the movie came out 4 years after he died. So it's really hard to say what's his and, what was replaced and what decisions were made after he was gone. And you can tell a lot of things are still keeping with his general sense of things and the way that he writes, but man, a lot of it isn't. There's a lot of stuff in here that just the tone and just the way that some of the actors portray the characters, it doesn't feel like The Hitchhiker's Guide. I mean, overall, you can tell that this movie is definitely The Hitchhiker's Guide, but it's kind of all over the place.
I mean, if I could sum it up in probably one word, it's forgettable. I do remember seeing this way back when I was a teenager, and I know why I had such a hard time remembering a lot of those scenes, because after watching it the second time, it was just I was like, oh yeah, that happened.
Well, so I was going to save this for later, but I'll just come out and say it. It wasn't forgettable for me. This movie was my first introduction to this series. It came out, we were 13 when this movie came out, or 12. I was 12. You must have been 12 or 11.
Yeah, so I guess coming into teenage years.
Yeah, so like I saw this movie probably in the theaters, maybe we rented it from Blockbuster when it came out on VHS or VHS. I think by then it was actually
No, we had
DVDs mostly.
DVDs. Yeah, it's
Yeah, that was a
that.
DVD time.
Definitely remember picking it up from a video store and watching it.
Exactly. I actually adored it when I was a kid. But you're when you're a kid, you don't know. I mean, I won't lie. I loved the Star Wars prequels when I was a kid because I was a kid. You don't know any better.
Well, I mean, like when
Um,
you're being introduced to a brand new world full of like different creatures and races and different things that sort of bend around the rules of our world. It's definitely very mesmerizing to a kid. I mean,
right.
I definitely was attached to that sort of thing, and I found a lot of the smaller bits of comedy that I understood when I was much younger to be quite entertaining. And then watching it a second time, I definitely got more of the bigger bits of comedy, a lot of the drier stuff, the British humor, and it was I appreciated it, but it definitely had its faults.
Yeah, it's hard to say because like okay, again, like I said, this book has come to be probably. I mean, it's definitely my favorite book series. I think I might actually like the third book, Life, the Universe, and Everything, the best of the three, or of the five. Five, and then there was a sixth one written later after his death by someone else that I haven't read. Um, but yeah, I love them all. I think the third book is really fun because there's just really creative, hilarious. Like there's just this big concept that runs underneath the whole thing that's just an absolute like lampooning of the way that the world works, but like on a completely galactic scale. I don't want to reveal too much because I really do think that everyone should read these books because they're so good. Um, but yeah, I probably would not have read the books had I not discovered it through the movie first. So that is the thing that I will defend about this movie. As much as it is not a good adaptation of that, there are people, and it's not just me, who saw it and liked it enough to have the curiosity to go out and read the books and maybe even experience the other forms of the story. I admit I have not seen the BBC show. It's actually quite hard to find nowadays. And I have listened to some of the radio drama, but not like the whole like 6 books equivalent of it, 5 books equivalent of it. Um, but yeah, I mean, first saw the movie when I was 11. Then I came back. I think I was in high school when I read the book, the first book. I loved it. And then a few years later, I think I was in college, I read the rest of them. And I liked them even more than the first one. It was just so good. Um, so I was going to say a bunch of other stuff about Douglas Adams himself and like his opinion of adaptation. And I might get back to that later, but I don't want to go too long about the background of this. I guess a brief summary, there's a lot of debate over whether or not he would have been satisfied with this movie because he did start the creation of it. He wrote the first draft, and defenders of this movie will say, from this movie that are changed, they were his ideas, but that's hard to say for sure. And he was someone who throughout his life adapted this story multiple times for various mediums, and he always defended his own adaptations, saying that every medium has different requirements, and that's kind of the thing that people lean on when they defend the adaptation. And then there's the argument that like, well, he was always at the helm, and now that he's not at the helm, it's not exactly something that he would approve of. And just to cite my sources for that, that was from a YouTube review that I watched the other day by a YouTuber by the name of Dominic the Dom Noble. Have you ever heard of him?
I have not.
Yeah, I hadn't either before I watched this. I don't fully agree with him because he just rips the movie to shreds. But I think he does make a point about how Douglas Adams wouldn't necessarily love this because he didn't really get the chance to finish it himself. That said, he always wanted there to be film adaptation of this movie. So I wouldn't assume that he would want it to stop just because he died. I think he would have wanted it to be completed. So this is what we got. This is the only Hitchhiker's movie that we will ever have that he worked on.
Oof.
mean it's the only one that'll ever exist. It doesn't mean it's the best one that'll ever exist. Some day someone might come along and redo this better.
I could say
I
one thing
hope
though.
so.
I was definitely curious when I was watching this movie. I remember you telling me it was based off of a number of books, and
And
this
radio dramas and
and
television shows
just
and text adventure
a
games.
huge amount of lore that was, and
Oh,
I
so much.
I got hints of it, and this I remember feeling the same exact feeling when I was a kid watching this. When it started opening up the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and it was explaining things, I was like, I want more of that. I want more of
Yes.
the guide to explain me, like just show me this universe. And
Well, I have some good news for you because that is most of the books.
well, yeah, and it gives me that sort of that curiosity. And I know past me was more like books, but now that I'm getting more into literature, it's definitely really tugging at the back of my shirt and saying, these if it's as this descriptive and as this if I were to put it into terms, I would say optimistically nihilistic. That's what I would consider this movie to be. Uh,
That is honestly like the overall theme of all of this. And
uh,
I do think that the first book definitely encompasses that theme the best.
mhm.
The other ones are just like fun reading that like give you completely ridiculous examples of all of it. But there's a line at the end of the movie, and it's at the end of the first book, where Slarna Bartfus, that's a character's name, says the odds of finding out what's really going on are so insanely thin that I figure the best thing to do is just hang the sense of it all and keep yourself busy.
Exactly.
That is the thesis of this entire book. That, by the way, coming from a character who is essentially God, and he
pretty
doesn't even
much.
know what's going on.
He's
Yeah,
he's like because it's like one of the elves in Santa's workshop. That's
yeah.
what I consider that to be.
Yeah, he's like a low level like god bureaucrat, but he's the one that controls the earth. So anyway,
But yeah,
the
it's
way
like
I want to play this, or go ahead if you
I was
have
saying like
more.
it was what I was saying before is like yeah the I think the I gotta commend the people who made this movie because I believe this movie out of if we were to assume that more of these movies would have been made again I don't know anything about the other mediums but if more of the movies would have been made the first one would have been the hardest to make because it had to set up the premise of being optimistically nihilistic and then at the very end where he's like once they sold the punchline of well, we're so insignificant, screw it, let's go on adventures. And then they do it. And then I guess, the movies after that can be a little bit more Rick and Morty with confetti, pretty much. And they go and they see all these different, they get put in situations with other cultures, other races, other planets. And you can show that sort of development with somebody who was so stuck up in the, previously. And now you get to see his sort of metamorphosis into a young Rick, that sort of thing.
And I think that's pretty in keeping with the books. So anyway, the way I want to play this episode, maybe a little differently than normal, I'm going to still go through my plot summary, but I'm going to do it as the movie on its own right. I'm not going to kind of say what's in the book, what's not in the book. I'm just going to straight up, here's the movie. And then we're going to go into the analysis. And James, I actually, if you don't mind, I'd like for you to actually kind of take the reins of the analysis so that you can give me all of your reactions to little things from the movie without your experiences of reading the books.
Mhm.
And then I can kind of jump in with commentary of, well, that's from the books. That's not from the books. That's not from the books, but apparently Douglas Adams wrote it, that whole thing. So anyway, the movie. The movie follows the main character, Arthur Dent, played by Martin Freeman. He is he's just a guy in his early 30s. Not very interesting. He lives on Earth. And he wakes up one day with a hangover to find that the people outside are about to demolish his home, and he tries to stop it. But then his friend Ford comes by, and he's like, "Hey, Arthur, come to the pub. I need to tell you something." So they go into the pub, and Ford is like, "Yeah, don't worry about your house. They're about to destroy your entire planet." And Arthur doesn't really process it, and he is more concerned with the house. And then so Ford gets him out of there by hitchhiking. They hitchhike onto one of the ships that's destroying the Earth. Earth gets completely wiped out by these creatures called Vogons, and it's more of just like a like a bureaucratic decision than anything else. They need to
Mhm.
build like a hyperspace highway, basically. Um, so yeah, they hitchhike and then they're on the ship with the Vogons. The Vogons try to kill them by reading them poetry because their poetry is really bad. And then they're thrown out the airlock and they hitchhike again and they're miraculously saved by this ship called the Heart of Gold that was stolen by the president of the galaxy, Zaphod Beeblebrox, um, who's played by Sam Rockwell, who is also happens to be Ford's semi half cousin, I believe. Ford, by the way, is played by Mos Def. So you know they meet up and they're happy to see each other. And it also turns out that on the same ship is the only other human alive, Trisha McMillan or Trillian, played by Zoe Deschanel. And as it turns out, she and Arthur had met once at a party in London, and you know Arthur kind of hit it off with her, but then kind of failed at the end, and Zaphod swooped in and took her away in a spaceship. So Zaphod is looking for this planet of Magrathea because it's very famous, and he thinks there's a lot of riches there. So they try to get there, and then they kind of get sidetracked, and I think they accidentally end up at this other planet that's controlled by this dude named Hamakavula, played by John Malkovich, who was Zaphod's political opponent. He captures them. He cuts off Zaphod's other head. I'm sure we'll talk about the other head nonsense. And then tells him that he'll give it back if he goes to Magrathea, where they were going anyway, and brings him back a gun that he can use to make people see things through his perspective. But before they can go to Magrathea, the Vogons show up and capture Trillian. So they have to go to Vogue Sphere, which is where the Vogons live, to save her. They do that, and then they go to Magrathea. And on Magrathea, while Zaphod and Trillian and Ford are off looking for the gun, Arthur and Marvin, who I actually haven't mentioned yet, Marvin is a depressed robot played by Alan Rickman. They meet up with Slarty Bartfast, played by Bill Nighy, who is basically like this planet creator who designs planets, but he's not really high up, but he's in charge of Earth design. Or maybe it's just Norway. I think it's just Norway.
He won an award for that.
Yeah, he won an award for that. And basically, he kind of just explains the way the universe works. And they find out that the Earth was actually created as a supercomputer, a living supercomputer, to calculate the ultimate answer to, or the ultimate question for life, because they already had the answer, which is of course 42, as we all know. And Arthur, and since it was destroyed, these two mice, which were the people who were like in charge of the Earth project, they capture Arthur. They try to steal his brain, and then he says some bullshit about how he loves Trillian, and they smash the mice, and then they're being chased by the Vogons, and they get their way to the Heart of Gold, and they go to the restaurant at the end of the universe. And the final line of the movie is so bad that it ruins any hope of any kind of sequel, because it completely shits on the lore. All right. That's that. So let's do the analysis. James, what did you think of this movie? What are things you didn't like? What are things that you liked? And I'll tell you if it's in the book or not.
Okay. So I'm gonna pretty much skim through the synopsis to just bring out little parts. So I remember what I was saying previously about optimistically nihilistic. It's the idea that you have somebody who's so entranced with just existing, and then them having some revelation that, to be honest, what everything they've been worrying about throughout their entire life is just simply so insignificant that why care? And we see the build up with Arthur Dent, who's just he's so worried about his house, and they sort of force a joke in there. I wasn't really a fan of the whole having them try to tear down his house to make way for the bypass, only to be a setup for when the Earth gets destroyed, because the Earth is destroyed to set up a bypass. If they were going to have that joke, I wish they had played it out a little bit longer.
They
Also,
do in the books.
okay.
That's in the books. They play that out further where there's this whole part where he's talking to the destruct or the guy like overseeing the destruction. And he's like, "Well, I mean the plans were in your local office for like a week." And Arthur's like, "Well, I didn't even know that they were there. No one told me." And then they zoom out to the Vogons and they're like, "Well, the plans were in Alpha Centauri for 50 years. How come you didn't go and check them out?" What do
Exactly.
you mean you've never been to Alpha Centauri?
And it's a great joke. I definitely want that in. It's just like I was just like, it kind of rushed me to the punchline. But
They definitely rush through the opening sequence.
that and also the entire relationship between Arthur Dent and Trish or Trillian. I wanted to see that sort of played out a little bit more because I mean, I understand like focusing the entire group around just the idea that Arthur is just this supposed to be this really introverted guy who's really in his own shell, and he's thrust into a world where that cannot happen at all because there's just so much going on, and any hesitation is just completely out the window. And I like that idea of like breaking somebody out of their shell, especially when it comes to the point of cosmic insignificance. And we go into the ship, and I didn't like the president of the galaxy. He's just he was either played poorly or just the character in itself just seemed so unrealistic. I guess
He was great.
I mean that's how it is in the book.
He's literally the best part of the movie.
Okay, so
I hate to rain on your parade, and you have your opinion. Obviously, that's just opinion. But I loved Sam Rockwell's performance because I think I will say though the whole part where they cut off his head and he becomes like all spaced out, that was dumb as hell.
yeah, that was the other thing I was
going
going to
to
rate on. I think I could have
absolutely not in the books.
I could have been okay with Sam Rockwell as the character, and then it was also because he had his brain separated into two heads, right? Because one part wasn't galaxy president enough or whatever. But again, it's just like I didn't know what exactly was separated because is it the impulse? But then at the same time, the president also was impulsive, so I don't think that was actually separated from him. So it's weird. Is it violence? I don't know.
Well, the thing with the two heads, in every iteration of the story so far, he has had two heads.
Mm-hmm.
In the book, it's fine because it's a book that's easy to do.
Mm-hmm.
In the radio drama, it's also easy. There's no pictures. In the television show, they give the dude this like latex second head. It is so friggin' disturbing looking. So they tried to like play it off in this one as it being inside his neck, which I guess is a way to do it so that you don't have to always have this second head here. But it just doesn't work the way he just like interjects himself in and says stuff.
Yeah,
in the books, the idea of like him having two heads and like one of them has like thoughts that he locked away in to keep them from himself. That's kind of the way they explain it in the book. He did it on purpose. I mean, he's always had. Oh, how does it work? No. His species can change their the way they look on sight, which is how Ford, who's also from that place, is able to blend in on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
So he does this and creates two heads because he has this like secret knowledge that he doesn't want anyone to know, and he knows that he's too stupid to be able to keep it a secret. So he keeps it a secret from even himself, but it's still inside of him, so he can access it if he needs to.
Yeah, it was literally, at least from my interpretation of the movie, it was just the lesser of the two douches.
Right. Well, I'll be honest, and I might make some enemies in the broader fan base, but I don't think the second head was important at all.
I mean, yeah.
It's the whole thing with the like keeping stuff from himself and all. That's all in the second book. That's in the restaurant at the end of the universe. There's really no point to the two heads in the Hitchhiker's Guide, so you could just have him as one head. That's fine. And I think that Sam Rockwell, he chose to play it. He Americanized the character, which I think works really well. And he tried to play it as like a crossover of Elvis and George W. Bush. Because 2005, I actually think that it's like the definitive version of Zaphod in my head until they get into the whole thing with like the lemon juice brain thing. That's so
Yeah,
stupid.
that's again, there was no, it wasn't different. That was the thing, is like I could
It's just
understand if there was like a
dumb.
difference between Zaphod in this form and Zaphon in this form and Zaphon with lemon in his head and stuff like that.
Yeah,
But it wasn't. It was just
it's just dumb. It's not useful.
so that was I got sort of fumbled around with that sort of thing. And then again, I didn't trust the whole, or not a point of trust, but I didn't believe the Arthur and the Trillian late romance. It
So
just
in the books,
yeah.
that's not there. I don't want to say it's not there at all, but like so the part where they meet at the party and he likes her and he fails, that's in there. And
That's a
like
good one. I
right.
liked that part.
And so there's awkwardness throughout the first book where he's kind of into her and maybe she is too, but like you can't even tell because it's all from his perspective and they don't really go too far into that. And then the second book a little bit, and then by the third book they don't even see each other anymore, and like they have completely separate stories. They don't end up together. Sorry to spoil things, but like I think it's that they needed a love story to make it like Hollywood friendly. But I
Well,
think they played into it so much that was like the central focus of the entire movie, and that is not the point of this book at all.
yeah, he got really lovey-dovey
Yeah,
near
the
the
end where
end
his whole like realization was because oh she's the one. Like no, that
because
is not.
true
That's not
bohemian
Hitchhiker's
love.
guide. Yeah, I
Oh
know, I
man.
know. Love, 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 love. Lift us up where we belong. Love,
Yeah.
love, love is
So
a thing with feathers. Love it. Love, 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 love.
moving on into Marvin. Marvin was fantastic. I loved the idea of a depressed robot because it just subverts the entire mentality of machinery, and that, in contrast with the really optimistic ship, was beautiful. I loved it.
Eddie's great.
I loved it, and I loved how they weaponized his depression at the end. That was
Marvin,
fantastic as well.
he's great. Alan Rickman, R.I.P. He did it great. The only complaint is that his design, he looks depressed, and
Mhm.
that's not really correct because he's not designed to be depressed. They made him to be really happy, but the problem was they also made him really intelligent. And like the idea is, if you make something extremely intelligent, it's automatically going to be depressed.
Exactly.
So yeah, so like if you in the television show, and it looks like it obviously it's like weird practical effects, but like I shouldn't even say that, but like low budget design. But like even in that, he has this like cheery like smile on his face always, but like everything that he says and his tone of voice is so depressed. And like I would have appreciated that,
Me
but
too.
I understand where they're coming from.
And then after that, I mean, the story. I liked the transition between the whole like slice of life, or not the slice, the fish out of water concept, where you have Arthur Dent in just this world of not knowing at all what's happening, and then have that transition into sort of a bigger plot or a story that's bigger than himself, which is the whole idea of discovering these planet creators and the question to the life, the universe, the everything. But to be honest, I would have liked if they pushed the whole question thing late into another movie. I know that's kind of unrealistic as far as like Hollywood goes, but as far as my analysis goes, I think having just the entire movie be based around like Arthur surviving and then establishing like his acceptance in where he is in the cosmos would have been a good enough premise, and then have that go into something where it's not just about acceptance, it's about now the realization or this giant epiphany that there's actually something bigger out there, and sort of like he can deny the whole person who just says like, oh well, you shouldn't be worried about your insignificance, just try to stay busy. But I did like the whole idea of Arthur sort of evolving or going through a metamorphosis of understanding his place and really being okay with that sort of thing, because I know some people just go insane. Pretty much spat in the face of
That
Lovecraft.
was like the main point of Arthur's character too. I think nowadays you could do something like that, where with the world of big budget cinematic universes in a post Avengers world, you can plan for multiple movies. But like at this point, they I don't think they thought they would be able to have a sequel.
Hmm.
I don't know if they were really concerned about it. And one of the biggest like things that gives that away. So the very last line of the movie,
Hmm.
they are in the ship and they're blasting off, and they're going a little while earlier. Ford says, "Oh, I know this good restaurant at the end of the universe," and then they're flying away, and Marvin goes, "I don't want to alarm anyone, but actually, the restaurant is at the other end of the universe," and they turn around and go back that way. That completely destroys any chance of there ever being a sequel because
How so? Yeah, I'm
the
curious.
restaurant at the end of the universe is not physically at the end of the universe. It's like it's a time thing because and that it's kind of it's like that on purpose. It's a misdirection. You see that title for the book and you think that they're going to a restaurant on the edge of the universe, and that's what Arthur thinks too when they first tell it to him. And then what they have to do is they time travel there because it's not at the edge
It's
of the universe.
temporal instead of
It's
spatial.
yeah, it's at the end of the universe. It is a restaurant that is like sealed in this bubble so that it constantly exists in like a time loop so that you go and you eat your dinner while you watch the universe crumble around you.
Wow.
Yeah, it's great. And there's like a cow in there that's like sentient and it walks up and it's like, "Hey, you're going to eat me tonight. What part of me do you want? I really recommend my thighs." It's
Because of
such a
the whole
good
time loop thing, it refreshes. That's pretty cool. It's a good concept.
it's such a good I love that. I actually think the first half of that book drags a lot, which is why I had trouble getting into it, and I had to put it down for like a few years. But the second half of that book is so funny. The whole thing that they do with the Gulga Frinchins, and I don't want to give away like their whole lore because it kind of ruins it. But like it's worth reading the rest of the series just for the Gulga Frenchian civilization and the Cricket civilization alone. And the Cricket civilization are in the third book. Those two, like, just concepts of people, it's so funny. I love it.
Yeah, and I guess overall, I saw this movie in two forms. So the first form is it's small bits of comedy that get hammered in there, especially when it comes to cosmic insignificance, like the whale scene in the bowl of petunias, where the as the whales fall and it goes through its head, and you get a little depressed at the end because you realize like this thing just came into existence and is trying to answer like these huge questions, and then boom, and then finally the petunias are like, oh no, not again. And
So
it,
the whale scene is great, and it's one of the best parts of the movie because it is literally a word for word, like straight out of the book. And just the way that they depict it is so great. And then the petunias, if you read, I think it's the third book, you find out why the petunias said not again, and I will not spoil it, but it's great.
so and it's really funny how they really hammer in the whole concept of nihilism, and then the fact that, like I said, optimistic nihilism, of taking something like nihilism, which is usually a very macabre, like very depressing subject, and sort of be like, no, it's okay, you can be insignificant, just have fun with it, and
Right.
nothing matters, with a like one of those little kazoo things that you blow at the parties. Just you blow it very British and sarcastically. And then the other part is sort of an uplift. So you have the comedy, which sort of like it makes fun of the idea of nihilism, and then you have the uplifting part where it's, yes, there's insignificance, but at the same time there's, because you don't have to search for meaning, you can come to discoveries and really enjoy the beauty of what's actually out there. And because you don't have to worry about where you stand in the universe, you can just be in the universe. And I liked how, and I'm sure the book does this as well because it had has way more time to flesh this out. But I think the movie did a good job with doing that. So if I were to put it, the beginning was a little weak, but it definitely ramps into something that was really really good near the end, really meaningful at the end.
Right. Yeah, I think that it's easy to just say stick to the books, right? And I think that in my pitch, I'm going to mostly do that. but like I do understand. I mean, there are a couple things at work here. Like first off, the books don't directly translate onto the screen. And I think that Douglas Adams, of all people, understood that. No matter what, I don't really think even today there's a way to make a two-headed Zaphod feel natural and like. I mean, obviously, it's not supposed to feel normal. It's supposed to look alien, but like, I mean, if you watch the television show, that latex head is just a constant distraction. And like, I don't know if Sam Rockwell would have been able to put in as much of a just uninhibited, like crazy performance that he did, which I again really like, with that holding him back. So I think, you know, things like that aren't going to translate directly. Also, you have to consider that, you know, it's an audience of people that aren't into this source material. So there has to be some sort of romance. There has to be a traditional antagonist, which the book never really had. And there has to be, you know, it has to be Hollywood safe, and that might be less so now. You know, we don't live in the 2005 world. There's a lot of weird stuff that happens on the internet, which is wonderful, and I want the world to continue functioning that way. So yeah, I wouldn't mind getting into the pitches here, unless you had any other little things that you wanted to toss out for nitpicks, and I could tell you if they're in the book.
Oh, well, I think this is a good way to transition into the pitches, because I sort of, I guess, really strung out what my pitch was going to be. So I'll start, because again, I'm kind of saying the pitch as is. In the short and short, basically what I just said the past couple minutes, but then also give me more time with Arthur in the beginning. I want to see at least a day before the deconstruction of his house. Just I want to see that. I want to see see Arthur get built up, and really show me why he's so contained within his shell. Maybe put the party at the night of that day. Then the next morning he wakes up hungover, and then, you know, demolishing of the house sets up that joke. We're good up until the explanation of everything else. Maybe not even have the love story, and then he really like hammers in the whole idea of Arthur being more likely to take risks because he no longer knows like what's actually going to exist the next time it occurs. So, you know, if Trillian, if she ends up dying the same time the planet's destroyed, then, you know, it would have really meant more to him, because then he blew it, you know. And it's that sort of understanding, it's a little small epiphany that maybe you should take more chances, and it would have been a good catalyst to his metamorphosis near the end. You know my opinions on Beeble Brock's. Maybe I would have enjoyed Sam Rockwell's performance a lot more if there was more of a difference between his personalities, and then finally, once his one personality gets taken away, the lemon part. And then other than that, I maybe move the whole overarching plot of the grand question. Just like maybe hint at 42 in that movie, and then see how the mice sort of like stow away on the ship, and like you see the small things, and maybe, you know, hopefully set it up for the next movie that there's this bigger plot going on with these pan-dimensional beings, and they're just sort of pawns in the whole thing. Other than that, I think it would have been, it's a great introduction to the books, and also I think it would have been a great sort of anti-Star Wars, like a subversion of Star Wars, where you have this like grand space opera where it's sort of the same thing, but it doesn't matter. And that's my pitch in a nutshell. You know, it's a lot of small things, and it's also at the, you know, because I have more of a creative freedom, because I'm not the one actually making the movie. Put different plots in different movies. And I think that would have been pretty okay.
All right. I think you want to kill Trillian on the planet.
Yeah.
Wow.
Just as a catalyst for Arthur.
Then we don't get random frequent flyer Dent.
Well, you can also bring an alien girl in. Like they pick up a stowaway. The irony of they pick up a hitchhiker when, you know, the main characters are hitchhikers themselves. You could do things with that. Plus, it's like it's more accepting that if Arthur Dent falls in love with an alien girl, because then it further enforces the idea of him breaking out of his shell and sort of accepting his place in the universe and being more accepting towards new experiences.
All right. Okay, so it's book time.
Yes. All right.
So I think that, again, it's easy to say follow the books. But I think that the first change that I want to make is that I think that this would work pretty well as like a mini series, maybe, or maybe more than a mini series, since there's so many books you can do like multiple seasons. Might be good on like a streaming platform, or maybe hey HBO, I know you're kind of struggling for something now that that Game of Thrones is gone. Maybe consider this. But yeah, so we start off, we keep to the whole Arthur on Earth thing. We start off the morning of the destruction, just because that's how it's on the books, and I don't really want to mess with that too much. But we can add the part where he has to like convince the foreman to not destroy his house, and Ford has this fun little like double logic thing. But yeah, that we lean on what is, or who I thought was the best performance in the movie. As much as I love Sam Rockwell as Zaphod, I think the best performance in this movie was Stephen Fry as the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah.
And since the book is so much more focused on those little guide snippets of like giving you background of these really funny circumstances, we lean on that. And as a result, we cut out a lot of the filler. Because here's the thing about this movie. There's a lot of filler. The whole planet with Hamakavula's planet, you notice when I gave my summary, I didn't mention the name of it, because I don't even know the name of it off the top of my head, because it's not in the books. That whole planet, Hamakavula, he's not in the books either. They say that what's his name? Douglas Adams came up with his character, but they're not really sure. I mean, you could prove that, but it's debatable. But he doesn't really need to exist either. See, there's kind of a vacuum of an antagonist, and that's how it exists in the book. The first book, there's really no antagonist, really at all. Everything that goes wrong is just kind of like mistakes, and things that like, random deus ex machina, but like in reverse, which I think really works into the overall theme of like you were saying, nihilism, but optimistic nihilism. And I think that if you need an antagonist, then you can draw from later antagonists that came in. So I don't know if you remember it, because it's this very offhand little scene. But when Zaphod is watching all the news coverage of himself, and he's like, feeling himself a little bit, and then they cut to this like pre-recorded interview with this guy named Gag Halfront, who goes, "Oh, Zaphod's just this guy, Remember that part?
Yeah, I do.
He's played by Jason Schwartzman. He's actually a hugely important character. He is like the main antagonist as far as anything has an antagonist in this series.
Really?
He's a psychiatrist. He's Zaphod's psychiatrist. He becomes more important. He's really only in the second book, because by the third and fourth and fifth books, they've completely like almost left the whole theme aside, and they're just having fun. But he's a psychiatrist who needs to stop the Earth from existing, because he doesn't want everyone to discover the meaning of life, because then they'll all be happy and they won't need psychiatrists anymore, which is the most Douglas Adams thing ever. I know, it's great. So take out the vice president of the galaxy, who's in love with Zaphod and needs to save him from himself, because she's also not in the books, and make him the one who's chasing him, because he is the one who throughout the second book is kind of manipulating Prostetnik Vogon Jeltz into chasing Zaphod. And a lot of the stuff from like the Vogue Sphere and when the Vogons are chasing them, that's mostly from the second book. Except they don't go to Vogue Sphere at all. No one goes to Vogue Sphere. The Vogons don't even go to Vogue Sphere. They all left after they found out how to travel in space, because Vogue Sphere sucks. That said, I do really like the face slappers. I
I
thought
have
that
an
was fun.
idea.
Yeah, I love
Whack.
that scene. And if you can find a way to incorporate that elsewhere, that's great. So we have our series. We keep it. There's no Hamakavula planet, no Vogue sphere. Trillian doesn't become this damsel in distress. They leave Earth and then they go straight to Magrathea. And it might only even be a couple episodes until you have to start going into the restaurant at the end of the universe stuff. But I think it's worth it to not bog it down with all this stupid filler and have a lot of time with the guide, just like explaining things and having fun. And then also to the point of the romance. If you need it, you can hint at it. You can even bring it to the forefront a little bit more than the book if you want to. But, and this is important, you cannot end the Hitchhiker's Guide arc with them together because they're not supposed to end up together. And maybe if you want to like at the end change things so that they end up together because you want to appeal to like people watching your show, okay, fine. But like there are other characters that they need to incorporate. You need to throw in Fenchurch. She's one of the best characters in the whole series. Um, and I don't want to really spoil anything about her, but I think she's the fourth book. So yeah, I think that stick to the books, keep the romance in the background, and if you need an antagonist, go with Gag, but try to not have one if you can get away with it.
See, I'm getting a lot of Doctor Who
Well,
from.
yeah. I mean, if you even like just look at the television show, and I've never actually watched it at length, but if you look at scenes from it, it looks a lot like early Doctor Who, which is probably part of the reason why I haven't seen it because early Doctor Who is really rough for me. I like 2000s era Doctor Who, but man, that early
So you
stuff
could
is
draw a
hard to
lot
get
of
through.
you could draw a lot of parallels where every episode is. I mean, you could really stretch it out with this lore because you every episode can be just them going to a different planet or like experiencing a different culture, and then you have the guide coming in and just like introducing bits and pieces of this planet or this culture in its own like witty, charismatic way. And then hell, you can even do a little bit more from the Doctor and say there's like an assistant every so often. Like they always pick up some person and then they have to like take them to another planet or like they get dropped off at a planet or they die in a planet. It's really, and you can really circulate like side characters that way. I think that'd be a pretty neat thing, especially romances. You can do that, and then it'll end up going by your restrictions of like there can be a love interest or like a romance, but it doesn't last very long and certainly doesn't last till the end.
Right. And like there's just stuff from the books that like came in later that really need to be in here that that didn't get into the movies but like they need their screen adaptation. The Golga Frinchins, the crickets, the sentient mattresses of Squantrelus Beta, Wow Banger the Infinitely Prolonged. And I'm not going to explain any of that, so you all have to go out and read the book so you can figure out what the hell I'm talking about.
But yeah, it's definitely the lore is so rich. Like even just the idea of the improbability drive being like fleshed out a little bit more, uh, is
I love the
definitely.
probability
Oh, it's
drive.
so
It's great.
good. I wanted to see more of it in that movie. Like we saw one and a half. We saw the yarn, and then we saw the sofa. Yeah, I guess the sofa. So two and a half. But I wanted to see more of that. You know, them being in different dimensions and being different like beings and having
And
that sort of things.
the sofa's actually not in the books. But I really like the sofa scene. In the books, they like go to this whole like I don't know, but they're penguins, and they like see each other and like, dude, we're penguins. What the hell? The yarn isn't particularly lore accurate because the bridge is supposed to be shielded from it, but like whatever, it's fun.
Yeah, I mean, so you can also just put it in different parts of the ship, but it's like
Right.
you know the whole it was very creative and the sofa scene it was such a great little comic bit because he says it so depressingly and yet accepting of it. He's just like,
Ford, I think I'm a sofa.
I know how you feel, and
That
then panic. I love
that
it.
destroyed me when I was 12. I saw that and I'm like, okay, I'm reading all these books. I have to do that someday, and I
Oh,
did.
because like it was so realistic in its unrealistic way. Because how do you respond to that? How do you react to something like that? Anyway, uh, I think the more we talk about this, the more depressed I get because now I really want to. I mean, I'm probably going to end up trying to read the books, but man, this could have had so much potential as far as
There are
just
a
world
lot of
building.
there are a lot of good audiobook recordings of the books out there. There's a whole series that Douglas Adams does himself.
Hmm.
There's actually one done by Martin Freeman because he's in this movie. But my favorite, and I think it might just be the first couple books. I haven't been able to find it for all of them. But Stephen Fry actually does a audiobook recording, and it is awesome.
Because yeah, that would have been my thing. I was like, "Is there one by Stephen Fry?" And then you just answered my prayers.
Yes, there is. So go and find that if you can. In fact, I probably will unearth that and use that on my way to work for the next like couple months because I love these books so much.
Well, is there anything else we would like to talk about as far as breath of fresh air, as far as like movie goes? I would consider it a breath of fresh air.
Nothing
It's
really.
fun.
Read the
Okay.
books. Get to Wowbanger the Infinitely Prolonged because he's fun as hell.
And let's talk about our speaking of journeys, let's talk about our next journey and what quote unquote planet we're going to be going to next.
So I have one suggestion. We don't have to do it right away. We can do it down the line, but I think it might be interesting. My brother actually suggested it to me. Not necessarily for the show, but we were just talking about bad movies. And he was like, "Oh, you like to review bad movies. Have you ever seen the Speed Racer movie?"
Ooh.
I've never seen it. Have
I
you
have
ever
not
seen
seen
it?
it either.
Yeah.
And I think actually think that's a good idea because we've been kind of making it easy on ourselves and picking movies that we've seen just like in the past. So
Uh-huh.
I would say yeah, let's give Speed Racer a shot because none of us have seen the have seen this movie and
I haven't seen it.
we get a
And
fresh intake.
this is a Wachowski movie. I didn't even know that. Wow, I'm just looking into it right now. Yeah, it's also good because it's an anime adaptation, which I think
Hmm.
is something that we're seeing more of now, and they're mostly bad, and it's a shame because I can appreciate a little anime here and again. I know you probably are more into it than me, but we can get into that.
I'd say it's definitely
Yeah,
a genre to for something that we would like to do as far as interviewing and fixing things would be.
right.
But yeah, I think yeah, let's do Speed Racer. I
Okay.
think that'll be pretty exciting. All
All
right.
right. So next week, Speed Racer.
Until then, we will see you all next time. Goodbye, everyone.
See ya.